Number 12, Dillahunty. The only possible foundation for morality must be agreement between individuals on that said foundation. And I put otherwise what? No prescription? Are agreements prescriptive? Do people agree on morally wrong things? Of course they do. Unless you're defining right and wrong by agreement, in which case all agreements are morally right. Are all agreements morally right? Nope. Sure aren't, are they? Why is that? Something above them? Interesting. Mere agreement would lead to cultural relativism. So the great wager is you live your life, you don't worry about whether there's a God or not. You don't worry, you don't fear God or man, right? You don't fear his laws. The great wager, however, can be an effective measure for prescription. I want to be very clear about something. Its effectiveness doesn't mean that it's not a prescription, right? If we have laws are not ultimately prescriptive in the meta scheme of things. Laws, because there can be immoral laws. But if you make a law that says you're not allowed to break into someone's house, hey, we don't have to have locks on our doors anymore. There's a law. No, you still need locks. So prescription doesn't mean effective. It's not. It doesn't lack prescription just because people don't obey it, right? And you can go to the Bible and see this. The Bible, that's what sin is God has clearly prescribed and man has disobeyed and continues to disobey. So that's really important. So the great wager, however, can't, but it has the potential to be effective. Foundational agreement doesn't have the potential to be effective. Okay, and what I mean by that is this, and that was kind of Dillahunty's thing, was this pragmatism that it can be effective. No, it actually can't. I am private if I don't have to be. I will say it's not fair or completely honest of me to say that it absolutely 100% cannot be effective. There are some people that it will be effective with. What I'm talking about is in your heart of hearts, right? In the hidden part of what the Bible calls, or what we modernists would call conscience. That's the issue. Is otherwise you wouldn't need locks on your doors, right? See, I can say, not that anyone can know, I can say, if I'm your neighbor, you don't need a lock on your door because I'm never going to break into your house. I know that in my heart of hearts. You should still lock your doors, right? It'd be foolish not to. But I know in my heart of hearts, I'm not breaking into your house. I ain't happening. Unless I need to help you for some reason. Why? Because the moral law of God. But it's not because there's some... What if I could break it and completely get away with it and I didn't believe in God and I could strike it rich? Wouldn't that be stupid not to do it? Right? You might, well, you're immoral. Well, it says you. Who cares? You don't know about it anyway. Yeah, but what about the agreement? I'll say I agree. You see what I'm saying here? That's not effective. But an omniscient, competent, omnipotent, wrathful God can pierce the conscience. That's effective. That affects the individual. All right. In my opinion, it seems that Dillahunty won't accept a scenario where God is proven. I don't think he would agree that's the case, but he has already stated that God would have to show himself or speak in so many words. But that wouldn't prove God's existence. That's to come short of full skepticism. There's always room to be skeptical. So this leads me back to my earlier assertion. Who gets to decide? It is by the grace of God that he decides what is enough evidence. If we decide, we could go down this skepticism route as far as we want, and nothing about it would be irrational. I've been toying around with the idea that you can't blend critical thinking and morality. You can think critically about morality, but if you blend critical thinking and morality, you end up with some problems like, oh, you You're applying the laws of logic. Well, that's a certain racial attitude that does that. You see? And you can just use morality to trump good critical thought. We cannot be the standard bearers of what constitutes enough evidence given our limited abilities. All right, now in 13, this is where we're going to wrap it up here. Scrivener challenges Dillahunty on preference, saying that preference begets preference. Dillahunty's response assumes the categorical imperative. Now, what do I mean by that? Another technical term here. This is Immanuel Kant. He keeps saying, for a better world, right? That if you do this, it's going to make a worse world. That's the categorical imperative. Now, what is that? Categorical imperative says this. You can know what's right and what's wrong by asking the question, if I do this, what would be the result? He does do this. Dillahunty says, life is preferable to death, but as a foundational notion. He goes, but what if, we could establish a foundational notion that death is preferable to life, but what would you end up with? Well, you'd end up with mass death. Everyone would die. Nihilism or whatever. That's the categorical imperative. That's it, right? What's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is that, one, it's not prescriptive. Again, I'm not going to, when I talk about prescription, I'm talking about the conscience. I'm not going to not break into my neighbor's house because what would the whole world be like if, you see what I'm saying? Like, great. The whole world's going to die in an inferno when the entropic reality, actualizes. So, break into your neighbor's house, go for it. You see? So, okay. Another problem with the categorical imperative, it doesn't explain enough. Why should someone jump on a hand grenade? What would happen if the whole world did this? Why would you jump on a hand grenade to save your compatriots? What would happen if the whole world did that? It could be reductionistic at times, especially when you're dealing with things like this, where you're asking, why are you appealing to these shifting concepts and calling them foundations? Foundations aren't supposed to shift. Foundations are supposed to be static. And that's kind of where and Scrivener didn't call him out on this. I'm like, foundations don't shift. And he kept arguing for them shifting. I'm like, that's not a foundation. You want to build a foundation on something that shifts? The whole point, it's category error. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but the point here is that he's not adequately describing what a foundation is. And he's sitting there saying this for a really long time, going on and on and on about you can change the foundations. They can go back and forth. It's like, that's called relativism. That's not a foundation. It's not even ethics. It's descriptive. So Scrivener, oh my goodness. In the end, man, Scrivener just drills him, man. I don't care what response he has. He just drills him. He really nails him. So he gets him on that an atheist cannot provide a just war theory. And what he does is this, he's pushing Dillahunty on an issue on World War II. And he's saying, are you saying that you could come to commune with Hitler to arrive at foundational agreement? And he's like, yeah. And then Scrivener goes, so you're having a symposium when meanwhile we should be at war. And this is where he really gets him good. Dillahunty goes, no, we shouldn't. Why would you say that? We should never argue. We should always want a symposium over war. Now look how absolutist he becomes about this. You haven't agreed on your foundations. It appears they're shifting. You said it was okay for them to be shifting, right? In fact, his mentality is warlike. He's yelling. It's warlike. I think Scrivener set out to make him mad because he knows how irritable he can get, and it is funny. Dillahunty's a funny guy. Like, if him and I were hanging out, I'd joke, I'd clown with him the whole time. I think he's hilarious. I love his personality. But when he gets mad, I would be trying to get his goat all the time because he's so funny when he gets mad. He's hilarious when he gets mad. Look him up on YouTube, his best moments. He's hilarious. He is a funny person, though. Like, he is funny. And when he gets mad, it gets even funnier. But, and I mean that as a sincere compliment. It has to do with how intelligent he is. Scrivener goes, "Oh wow!" He goes, "You're Neville Chamberlain." He goes, "Peace in our times." It was so good. Oh, he just drilled him. And to Dillahunty's credit, he can be rattled and still sharp. He talks about, well, we're using specific things to talk about general principles. Good recovery. He still lost the point. It was in terms of he lost the point. I ran out of time. I should have studied his point in a little more detail, but he lost it on rhetorical points. Okay. So 15, point 15. I think fundamentally, as helpful as his criticisms are, Dillahunty is ultimately being kind of hypocritical. He is consistently demanding epistemic certitude from everyone but himself. And that's what I really took away from this debate. I'm not saying he's a general hypocrite. I would never call him that. I'm saying in this debate, his positions are hypocritical. He really wants everyone else to prove this position, but he's not convinced there's a God. That's his position. What if we went around saying, I'm just not convinced of atheism? I'm just not convinced of it. Well, but atheism is the lack of conviction there's a God. Okay. Well, I'm lacking conviction over atheism. We wouldn't go anywhere. There'd be no debate, right? So I just think it's kind of hypocritical in my opinion. 16, Dillahunty names 3 foundations that can conflict with our preferences, yet he goes on to explain that these foundations are subjective, right? They're shifting. He says that you can actually switch what the foundations are to the opposite, then says death could be preferable to life, but then you get to extinction. Again, that is the categorical imperative. 17, Dillahunty wants his cake and to eat it too. He wants objective ethics, but he wants to establish them with his personal preferences. It's futile to change someone's mind. At least I think Dillahunty believes this. It's futile to change someone's mind, then role plays what he doesn't value. Hold on. Okay, let me explain this. What he does is he's talking to Scrivener, and he gets really irritated with Scrivener because I think Scrivener's got him to this point. I think he feels a little threatened. And Scrivener's pressing him, right? And then he says how he doesn't put it in so many words, but he basically says, how am I supposed to change someone's mind? And so he says, okay, Scrivener, change my mind. Now, Scrivener has an error here. Don't forget the wickedness of the human heart. No offense to Dillahunty. We all have wickedness in our hearts. That's my worldview coming out. I'm just trying to be as fair as I can on this. You be endlessly skeptical. You don't have to be rational to be skeptical. Come on, it's easy to be skeptical. To take the negative position on any worldview is easy. Anyone can condemn a worldview and just hammer it. That's easy to do. Anyone can do that. So it's easy to be skeptical. So him say, change my mind. But let's not forget Dillahunty's point. His point is that to expect him to change someone's mind doesn't make a lot of sense because he can't do it. But here's my thing with that. It's anecdotal. Just because Dillahunty's role playing out that he can't change someone's mind doesn't mean that you can't change someone's mind. Right? So, but his point was, it was more of a minor point between him and Scrivener, but I thought it was really interesting. And it led me to a lot of thoughts, led me to points I wanted to clarify. Like prescription does not mean effective. It has the potential to be effective, though. Whereas the other worldviews, they don't have the potential, and I'm talking about conscience. They don't have the potential to affect the conscience. Not in an objective sense. In a subjective sense, yes, but not in an objective sense. So the issue is if prescription has the possibility of being effective to those who can otherwise be held accountable. The categorical imperative cannot do this. All right, finally, my final point here and wrapping it up. 18. At one point, Dillahunty tries to say God was focused on I thought this was really beneath Dillahunty. Was earlier in the debate, but I wanted to point it out. I was disappointed. This is Village Atheist. It's so far below him. He's too smart. He's too smart to bring up this point. I was disappointed. This is Village Atheist stuff. Okay, I cannot imagine Sean Carroll or Quentin Smith or Oppie or one of these really highly educated, brilliant atheists, or Stephen Hawking, bringing out this point. All right. At one point, Dillahunty tries to say God was focused on trivial matters as opposed to being slavery. Now, his example was this. He was too worried about eating shrimp or what kind of thread you were using in your garments. I think this is just another reason why scholars don't debate people who don't have PhDs. This is why they don't do it, because they bring up these kind of silly points that it just shows that he just doesn't know the Bible. And I said it in an earlier video on this, that by the end of this, you'll see that he just didn't find the Bible to be significant, and he never did. If he did, he would not think this point is significant. It's not. So let me go over it real quick because it's a good teaching opportunity. In Genesis, God begins by separating. All right. So that's the first thing in Genesis is separation. There's a hint about what's going to happen here, right? God's separating the oceans from the, and so forth. Now, he furthers this with Israel's lifestyles. Okay, Israel's lifestyle. So Israel is not to mix certain seeds, right? They're not to mix certain threads. They're not to eat certain foods. Now, there's several reasons for this. If you read the book of Judges and so forth, there's several reasons for this. One is that God's nature is that he wants to separate Israel from the world. This is God's MO, right? This is his modus operandi. This is what he does. He separates. That process will continue for eternity, and we'll get into that in a minute. But there's a pragmatic reason for this. If you don't eat certain foods, or if you don't plant certain seeds, or if you don't use certain fabrics, you don't import or export with those nations, and you don't import their gods. That's significant, right? So there's a very real threat of saying, if I don't embrace their gods, they may stop trading with me. Now you might say, well, those are luxury items, Travis. I just went over not too long ago how God gave manna and they were complaining about not having meat. They forgot being thankful to God because of luxury. So then Jesus said this, be in the world, yet not of it. Separation. It continues in the New Testament. Eventually, judgment comes when God separates himself from those who are dead in their sinful unbelief. And I think that was a good point to end this on, is that God is the arbiter of what is enough evidence. You don't accept that evidence. The reason for that is sin. They don't like that. That's okay. They do the same thing. Determining for us what prayer is. Determining for us how we ought to think about things. We don't have to play that game. We argue from the periphery. You're dead in your sinful unbelief. That's my doctrine. I'm not being arrogant. I'm not telling you what you believe. You don't know the depths of your own heart. I don't know the depths of my own heart. You know your own heart better than I know it, for sure. But my belief is that I believe what the Bible says, and I believe that our unbelief ultimately comes from our sin. And you will be separated from God at that time when God ultimately judges the world. And sadly, if you watch Dillahunty and you really see him, and you don't have a heart for this guy as a Christian, If you don't, even Penn Jillette says we should have a heart. My goodness, he's as atheistic as you can get. Even he says we should have a heart for unbelievers. That he's moved by that, and I agree with that. And I think if you can watch Dillahunty talk, yeah, he can be hot-headed, but you see a guy here who's honest, and I think he is actually looking for answers. Sometimes I think sometimes you could see that he's probably not going to believe. He's determined not to believe, I should say. We should never count anyone out. But, we should be praying for him. Anyway, I think Scrivener won this debate. Did a really good job. And you should watch this debate. It's really good.